If you've ever been told to be careful with fruit because of your kidneys, I want you to hear one thing before we get anywhere near a list. For most adults over 60, quietly cutting fruit out of the diet is more likely to work against your kidneys than for them. I know that sounds backwards. Almost every conversation about kidneys and food starts with the word less. Less salt, less potassium, less phosphorus. And somewhere along the way, a lot of people hear potassium, think fruit, and decide the safest thing to do is eat almost none of it. But here's the part that rarely gets explained clearly. Potassium restriction is not a general rule for everyone over 60. It's a specific instruction for specific people in specific situations. And if you apply that instruction to yourself when it doesn't apply to you, you end up removing fiber, water, vitamin C, and plant compounds from your diet, and replacing them with things that are almost certainly worse for your blood pressure and your blood sugar, which, as you'll see, are the two things that matter most to your kidneys in the first place. So today, I want to do something a little different from the usual list. I'm going to walk you through 8 fruits that show up again and again in kidney nutrition guidance as lower potassium kidney compatible choices. We'll talk about what each one actually offers in plain language without pretending that any fruit repairs a kidney. But alongside that, I'm going to help you answer a more useful question. Which version of this advice applies to you? Because there are really 2 audiences watching right now, and the same list means 2 very different things depending on which one you are. Stay with me to the 8th fruit because that one comes with a real catch. 2 of them, actually. The second catch is bigger than the first, and I've almost never heard anyone mention it. And near the end, I'll give you 2 questions to ask at your next appointment. They take about 15 seconds to ask, and they'll tell you more about your kidneys than any list of foods ever will. Let's start with something short, because it makes everything else make sense. Your kidneys are 2 organs each, roughly the size of your fist, sitting toward your back just under the rib cage. Most people think of them as a filter, and that's true, but it undersells them considerably. They filter waste out of your blood, yes. They also decide how much fluid stays in your body and how much leaves. They help regulate your blood pressure. They balance minerals like sodium, potassium, calcium, and phosphorus. They help activate vitamin D. They send the signal that tells your body to make red blood cells. So when kidney function drops, it isn't just a waste problem, it's a balance problem. And potassium is one of the clearest examples of that balance. Potassium is essential. Your nerves need it, your muscles need it, your heart needs it. In people with normal kidney function, a diet rich in fruits and vegetables, which is naturally a diet rich in potassium, is generally associated with better blood pressure and better long-term health. That's the ordinary situation for most people. Now, when kidney function falls far enough, the kidneys can lose some of their ability to clear extra potassium, and the level in the blood can climb higher than it should. That's a genuine medical concern, and it's why potassium limits exist. But notice the sequence. The restriction follows the loss of function. It isn't a precaution you take at 60 just because you had a birthday. Here's the first genuinely useful thing I can give you, and I want to give it to you now, rather than making you wait 20 minutes for it. In the earlier stages of reduced kidney function, potassium is usually not restricted at all, unless blood tests show the level is actually running high. Stricter limits generally come later in more advanced disease, on dialysis, or in certain specific circumstances. And here's the part almost nobody mentions. Kidney stage isn't the only thing that affects potassium. Several very common medications influence it too. Some widely used blood pressure medications, the ones many people over 60 take to protect their kidneys and their heart, tend to raise potassium levels. Certain diuretics do as well. So it's entirely possible for someone with only mild kidney changes to need potassium monitoring because of their medication. And equally possible for someone else with similar kidney numbers to need no restriction at all, which means low potassium is not automatically better. It's better for some people. For everyone else, it's simply neutral. So, keep this one idea in your pocket as we go through the list, because it changes what the list is for. If a doctor or a kidney dietitian has told you to watch your potassium, then what follows is your safer choice short list. These are the fruits that tend to fit more comfortably inside a limited potassium budget, which matters enormously when you've been told your budget is tight. If nobody has told you that, and most people watching haven't, then this is simply a very good fruit list. And a few of these have some genuinely interesting properties beyond the potassium question. You can enjoy all of it without treating any of it as a restriction. Same 8 fruits, 2 completely different jobs. Let's begin. The first one is the one most tied to the evening, and it's the one I have the most to say about, including where I think the usual claim goes too far. Tart cherries. And the word tart is doing real work there. We're talking about the sour varieties, the ones you'll often see called Montmorency, not the big, sweet, dark cherries you snack on in summer. Sweet cherries are fine food, but they're a different food nutritionally. And if you're counting potassium carefully, portion size matters more with them. Tart cherries contain small amounts of naturally occurring melatonin, along with the building blocks your body uses to make it, and a family of deep red plant pigments that have been studied for their antioxidant activity. Now, what does the evidence actually show? There have been small studies, some specifically in older adults with poor sleep, suggesting that tart cherry juice may modestly improve sleep. The studies are small, the effects are moderate. This is not a sleep medication, and I'd be doing you a disservice if I implied it was. But it's a reasonable, low-risk thing to try. For some people, it seems to help a little. Here's where I want to be careful with you, because this is exactly where health videos tend to overreach. You'll hear a chain of reasoning that goes like this. Your blood pressure is supposed to fall during sleep. Poor sleep is associated with that drop not happening properly. Sustained high pressure overnight is associated with strain on the small blood vessels in the kidneys. Therefore, cherries protect your kidneys. Every individual link in that chain is a real documented association, but the conclusion at the end of it is not. Nobody has shown that eating cherries at night preserves kidney function. What we have is a plausible story built out of separate findings. That's worth knowing about. It is not worth building a treatment plan around. So, here's how I'd actually use tart cherries. If sleep is a struggle for you, a modest portion of tart cherries or a small glass of unsweetened tart cherry juice in the evening is a pleasant, low-risk thing to try. Unsweetened matters. Most cherry products on the stored shelf are sweetened heavily. And at that point, you're mostly drinking sugar. And there's a practical caution that the sleep angle makes ironic, which we'll come back to later, in a way that may change how you think about the whole bedtime fruit idea. Hold that thought. The second fruit is one you've heard praised so often that it's easy to tune out. I'd like to make it interesting again by focusing on something other than the word antioxidant, blueberries. Per typical serving, blueberries sit among the lower potassium fruits, which is why they show up on nearly every kidney-friendly list. They're low in sodium, low in phosphorus, and they carry a good amount of fiber for their size. Frozen blueberries hold up nutritionally very well, and they're often half the price. If cost is a consideration, and for many people it is, buy them frozen without a second thought. But here's what makes them worth talking about at your age rather than any age. Kidney disease and heart disease are not separate problems that happen to occur in the same person. They share most of their major risk factors: high blood pressure, high blood sugar, smoking, inflammation, and they tend to travel together and progress together. The single most useful mental shift I can offer you today is this. Most of what protects your heart also protects your kidneys, and vice versa. That's why a food like blueberries earns its place. Not because a berry repairs a nephron, because dietary patterns rich in colorful fruits and vegetables are consistently associated with better cardiovascular outcomes. Better cardiovascular outcomes are, over time, better kidney outcomes. So, which matters more, the blueberry or the blood pressure? The blood pressure every time. And I'll come back to that because it's the honest center of this entire subject. A reasonable portion is about half a cup. Fresh, frozen, or freeze-dried all work. The third fruit is the one I'd reach for first if someone told me their potassium limit was genuinely tight. Strawberries. Among common fruits, strawberries sit at the low end of the potassium range for a normal serving, which makes them one of the more comfortable choices for people managing strict your limits. They're low in calories for the volume you get, which is a real advantage when you want something sweet without much else attached. and they're an excellent source of vitamin C. That last point gives me a chance to hand you a caution that is genuinely useful and almost never mentioned in videos like this. Vitamin C from strawberries or from any whole fruit is not a concern. Vitamin C from high-dose supplements is a different matter. Large doses of supplemental vitamin C can increase the amount of oxalate your body produces. And oxalate is a major component of the most common type of kidney stone. If you have a history of kidney stones or reduced kidney function, high-dose vitamin C tablets are worth a conversation with your doctor or pharmacist before you make them routine. That's a useful distinction to carry with you generally, actually. Nutrients in food and nutrients in high-dose pills often behave very differently. And the kidneys are frequently where that difference shows up. Half a cup of fresh or frozen strawberries is a sensible portion. Rinse them just before you eat them rather than days ahead, and they'll last considerably longer. Now, before we go further, I want to change the conversation for a few minutes, because if we just keep listing fruits, I'll have given you a pleasant video and very little that actually helps you. You may have noticed that the first three fruits were all sold to you on more or less the same idea. Antioxidants, anti-inflammatory compounds, plant pigments with impressive names, those things are real. But if I lined up everything that influences the health of your kidneys over the next 10 years and put them in order of impact, fruit would not be near the top. And I'd rather tell you that honestly than let you leave here thinking a bowl of berries is doing the heavy lifting. So here's the honest order, roughly. Blood pressure comes first. High blood pressure damages the small vessels that do the filtering gradually and without symptoms. Keeping it controlled is the single most protective thing most people can do. Blood sugar comes next, and it's essentially tied for first if you have diabetes, because diabetes is the leading cause of kidney disease. Then sodium, and I want you to sit with this one for a second, because there's a strange imbalance in how people think about it. Enormous worry about the potassium in a banana. Very little worry about the sodium in soup, deli meat, bread, and restaurant food. For most people, sodium is by far the bigger lever, and it's the one that connects directly back to blood pressure. Then medications. This one deserves its own moment. Over-the-counter anti-inflammatory painkillers, the common ones people take for knees, backs, and headaches can affect kidney function, particularly with regular long-term use at older ages or when kidney function is already reduced. Occasional use for most people is a different situation from daily use for years. If you take one of those regularly, that's a genuinely worthwhile conversation to have with your doctor or pharmacist. And it may matter more than every food choice in this video combined. Then fluid intake appropriate to your situation. And I say appropriate deliberately because it cuts both ways. Some people need to drink more. Some people in advanced kidney disease or heart failure are told to drink less. There is no universal number. And then, after all of that, diet quality, which is where fruit lives. So, why am I still making a video about fruit? Two reasons. First, because diet quality is the part that sits in your hands and every single day at your own kitchen table. And small, consistent choices there add up over years. And second, this is the one that actually motivated me, because bad fruit advice makes people worse off. When someone eliminates fruit out of a vague fear, they don't replace it with nothing. They replace it with crackers, biscuits, and something from a packet. That's a real loss, and it's avoidable. All right, back to the list with that perspective in place. The fourth fruit is the most ordinary one here, and I'd argue the most underrated: apples. Low in potassium, low in phosphorus, low in sodium, available everywhere, cheap most of the year, and they keep for weeks. Practicality counts for a lot when you're trying to build a habit rather than a one-week experiment. But the reason I want to spend time on apples is fiber, and specifically what fiber does to blood sugar. Whole fruit comes with its fiber intact, and that fiber slows down how quickly the sugars are absorbed. The result is a gentler rise in blood glucose than you'd get from the same fruit as juice. Now, connect that back to what I said a moment ago. Diabetes is the leading cause of kidney disease. Anything that helps keep blood sugar steadier is indirectly but genuinely kidney relevant. That's a far more defensible claim than anything about antioxidants, and it applies to a huge number of people watching. Eat the peel. Much of the fiber and most of the plant compounds live in and just under the skin. So peeling an apple removes a meaningful share of the reason you're eating it. Now, let me correct something, because you may have heard it, and it isn't quite right. You'll sometimes hear that apples prevent kidney stones because of an acid they contain. I'd leave that one alone. The best supported dietary steps for stone prevention are drinking enough fluid, keeping sodium moderate, and, depending on the type of stone, specific guidance from your doctor. Citrus, particularly lemon, has better support behind it than apples do for that specific purpose. Apples are a good food, they're not a stone treatment, and stone advice is genuinely individual, because the right diet for one type of stone can be the wrong diet for another. One medium apple with the skin on, eaten slowly, is a perfectly good evening habit. The fifth fruit is one that surprises people, partly because it tastes like it shouldn't be allowed. Grapes, red and purple grapes, carry the same family of deep pigments we've mentioned before, and per standard serving, they sit on the lower potassium side of the fruit world. You'll often hear grapes connected to resveratrol. So, let me give you the reality check. The amount of resveratrol in a serving of grapes is small, far below the doses used in laboratory studies that generated the excitement in the first place. Enjoy grapes because they're good. Don't buy a resveratrol supplement on the strength of a grape, and be especially wary of any supplement marketed as a kidney treatment. Here's the practical piece, and it's a good one. Freeze them. Frozen grapes are a genuinely clever trick, and it's a tip that comes straight out of kidney dietetics. For people on a fluid restriction, which includes many people on dialysis, constant thirst is one of the hardest daily burdens, and it's rarely discussed. A handful of frozen grapes takes a long time to eat, feels cold and refreshing, and satisfies that urge for something cooling without the fluid volume of a glass of water or juice. If that's your situation, that one idea may be worth the whole video. And even if it isn't your situation, frozen grapes are a slow, sweet, satisfying evening snack that takes 10 minutes to get through instead of 30 seconds. But there's a trap here, and it applies to every fruit we've discussed. So let me say it plainly. At the point where it's most likely to bite you, low potassium always means low potassium per serving. Not per bowl, not per bunch. Grapes are the easiest fruit in the world to keep eating without noticing one at a time, absent-mindedly, until the bunch is gone. Eat 3 servings of a low potassium fruit, and you've eaten a moderate potassium amount of it. If your potassium is restricted, the portion is not a suggestion, it's the entire point. About half a cup of grapes is a serving. The 6th fruit is the fiber champion of the list, raspberries. For their size, raspberries carry more fiber than almost any fruit. You'll find roughly 4 grams in half a cup, which is a lot for something that light, and they sit among the lower potassium berry choices. Fiber matters here for a reason, more immediate than any long-term mechanism. Constipation is very common in this age group, and it's more common still in people with kidney disease. Partly because of restricted diets, partly because of reduced fluid, and partly because some medications used in kidney care are constipating. Raspberries are a genuinely pleasant way to add fiber to an evening without adding much of anything else. There's also active research interest in the relationship between gut bacteria and kidney disease progression. It's a legitimately interesting field. It's also early. And the honest summary is that we don't yet know how much any individual dietary change moves that needle in people. I'd rather tell you it's promising than tell you it's proven. And here I want to correct another claim you may run into. You'll sometimes hear that eating fiber-rich fruit alongside dinner blocks phosphorus absorption from your meal. I wouldn't rely on that. The effect, if it exists at all, is small. But since we're on phosphorus, let me give you the version of this advice that actually works, because it's one of the most useful things in kidney nutrition, and it almost never comes up in videos about fruit. Phosphorus that occurs naturally in whole foods is absorbed relatively inefficiently. Phosphorus added to processed foods as an additive is absorbed far more completely, a large majority of it. So the same amount of phosphorus on a nutrition label can behave very differently in your body, depending on where it came from. The practical step is simple. On packaged foods, read the ingredient list, not just the nutrition panel, and look for ingredients containing the letters PHOS, phosphoric acid, sodium phosphate, various phosphates that appear in colas, processed cheese, deli meats, and a lot of packaged baked goods. If you take one thing from this section, make it that. It'll do more for phosphorus control than any berry will. The seventh fruit is the one people are most surprised to find here because it's tropical acidic and doesn't fit the image of a cautious food. Pineapple. It shows up in kidney-friendly guidance as a lower potassium tropical option, which is genuinely useful because most of the fruits people crave from that category, bananas, melons, oranges, kiwi, sit at the higher end. Pineapple contains an enzyme called bromelain, which has been studied for anti-inflammatory effects. Now, here's my honest reading of that. Most of the research uses concentrated bromelain preparations at doses well beyond what you'd get from eating fruit. Whether a bowl of pineapple produces any measurable anti-inflammatory effect in a person is not established. So enjoy pineapple because it's excellent. Just don't file it under medicine. One small practical note, if you take a blood thinner, bromelain is worth mentioning to your pharmacist before you start eating pineapple daily or taking it as a supplement. Not a reason to avoid pineapple, just worth a sentence at the counter. Fresh versus canned deserves a moment too. Fresh pineapple keeps more of its enzyme content. Heat processing reduces it, but I don't want that to become a barrier. If canned is what's affordable and available to you, choose fruit packed in water or its own juice rather than syrup and drain it. That's a perfectly reasonable choice, and it's far better than skipping fruit entirely because fresh pineapple felt like a luxury. Pineapple juice, on the other hand, I think twice about. It's concentrated sugar with the fiber removed, and we'll return to that theme in just a moment. About half a cup of fresh pineapple is a sensible portion. And now the eighth, the one I told you to stay for, cranberries. And the catch is real, both of them. Let's start with what's true, because there is something real here. Cranberries contain compounds that appear to make it harder for certain bacteria to stick to the wall of the bladder. Based on that, there's a reasonable body of research suggesting cranberry products may reduce the risk of recurrent urinary tract infections in some people, particularly women who get them repeatedly. Health agencies describe that evidence as real, but limited, and the effect as modest. That's a fair summary. It's not nothing, and it's not a cure. Here's what is not true, and this part matters medically. Cranberry products do not treat an infection you already have. If you have burning, urgency, fever, chills, or pain in your back or side, that needs a doctor, and it needs one promptly. A urinary infection that travels up to the kidneys is a serious illness, and it becomes more serious with age. Cranberry juice is not a treatment. Please don't wait it out with a glass of anything. Now, catch number one, which the source of most cranberry advice completely obscures. Raw cranberries are almost inevitably sour, so essentially nobody eats them plain. Which means that in practice, cranberry reaches most people as juice cocktail, sweetened dried cranberries, or a flavored supplement. And those products frequently contain a great deal of added sugar. Sugar-sweetened drinks are associated with worse metabolic health, worse blood sugar control, and higher weight, all of which run in exactly the wrong direction for your kidneys. So you can end up drinking something marketed for kidney health that in the amounts people actually drink, it works against the thing it's sold for. Whatever benefit exists lies in the unsweetened whole form and in unsweetened juice, not in the sweetened products most people bring home. And there's a medication note worth repeating. There's been long-standing discussion about whether cranberry interacts with a common blood-thinning medication. The evidence is genuinely mixed, but if you take a blood thinner, mention cranberry to your pharmacist before you make it a daily habit. It's a 30-second conversation and it costs you nothing. Now, here's catch number two. And this is the one I said was bigger. Your urinary tract and your kidneys are not the same thing. Almost every video on this subject blurs them together. And it's an easy slide to make because they're connected plumbing. But the evidence for cranberry is about preventing bladder infections in people who get them repeatedly. That is a specific, useful, fairly narrow benefit. It says essentially nothing about protecting kidney filtering function, slowing chronic kidney disease, or improving your kidney numbers. Both are worth caring about. They're just different problems with different causes and different solutions. And once you can hear the difference, you'll start noticing how often the two get quietly merged into one impressive sounding claim, not just about cranberries, but across this entire genre of health content. So, cranberries, yes, in the unsweetened form if recurrent urinary infections are a problem for you. As a kidney protector, I'd set expectations much lower. Now, let me come back to something I asked you to hold on to near the beginning because it applies to the whole idea of eating fruit before bed. And I think it's genuinely worth the wait. The premise of most bedtime tonic advice is that timing is doing something special. My honest view is that the timing is mostly a framing device and that what actually matters at night is a set of practical considerations nobody mentions. Consider 4 of them. First, fluid. Remember the tart cherry juice we discussed at the start? Now notice the contradiction. If you're on a fluid restriction and if you have advanced kidney disease or you're on dialysis, you very likely are then a glass of juice before bed is not a neutral health addition. It's part of a budget you've been told to keep. In that situation, whole tart cherries make far more sense than the juice, and the frozen grape trick makes more sense than either. Second, and this one is almost funny. If you drink a substantial glass of anything an hour before bed at our age, there's a decent chance you'll be awake at 2 o'clock in the morning because of it. And we started this whole conversation talking about the importance of sleep. A bedtime routine that improves your sleep chemistry while interrupting your sleep is not a net gain. Third, blood sugar. If you have diabetes, a large portion of fruit or a glass of juice late in the evening can affect your overnight numbers. Whole fruit in a modest portion behaves far more gently than juice. This is one of the clearest arguments for whole fruit over juice anywhere nutrition. Fourth, reflux. Acidic foods, pineapple and cranberry in particular, eaten shortly before lying down, can make heartburn worse for people who are prone to it. Simple, physical, and easy to miss. So, does that mean you shouldn't eat fruit in the evening? Not at all. If a small bowl of berries in the evening is something you look forward to, that's a genuinely good habit, and the enjoyment is part of why it lasts. Keep it modest, keep it whole rather than liquid, and give yourself a little time before you lie down. But I want you to walk away with the right emphasis. What your kidneys respond to is the pattern of your eating across weeks and months, not the clock. Nothing in nutrition works on a stopwatch, which brings me to the mistakes. These are the ones I'd most like you to avoid, and a couple of them are genuinely important. The biggest one, and the reason I opened the way I did, eliminating fruit out of fear without ever being told to. If nobody has tested your potassium and told you it's high, you're solving a problem you may not have and paying a real cost to do it. The second, assuming that kidney-friendly means kidney healing. A kidney-friendly food is one that fits comfortably within the limits your kidneys can handle. It's a food that doesn't add strain. That's a meaningfully different thing from a food that restores function. And no fruit does the second one. The third is the most important thing I'll say in this section, so please stay with me for 30 seconds. Salt substitutes. Many products sold as low sodium or no salt alternatives are not sodium-free seasonings. They're potassium chloride potassium in a highly concentrated, easily absorbed form, which means the person most likely to be reaching for one of those shakers, someone worried about their blood pressure and their kidneys, may be the exact person who should not be using it. If you have reduced kidney function or you take one of the blood pressure medications that raises potassium, a potassium-based salt substitute can push your levels higher than any bowl of fruit ever could. If there's a shaker like that in your kitchen right now, please check the ingredients and ask your doctor or pharmacist whether it's appropriate for you. I find it striking that this almost never comes up in conversations about potassium in fruit when it's likely a much larger factor. Fourth, herbal supplements and kidney cleanse products. Supplements are not required to prove safety the way medications are. Some herbal preparations can affect kidney function and some interact with prescriptions. If your kidney function is reduced, run anything new past your pharmacist first. And there's no such thing as a cleanse. Cleaning your blood is what your kidneys do. That's the job. Fifth, relying on juice instead of whole fruit. By now, I hope the reason is obvious. Juice removes the fiber and concentrates the sugar, which is precisely backwards from what most people watching need. And sixth, the one that ties everything together, not knowing your numbers. So let's finish there because this is the part that turns everything else into something you can actually act on. Kidney function is usually estimated from a routine blood test using a marker called creatinine to calculate a number called eGFR. That's the number most people have heard of, and it's the one that gets discussed at appointments. But there's a second test that matters at least as much, and it's the one that regularly gets missed. It's a urine test that measures albumin, a protein that shouldn't normally be leaking out compared to creatinine in the same sample. You'll see it called a urine albumin to creatinine ratio, or UACR. It's a simple sample, no fasting, no preparation. Why does it matter so much? Because protein appearing in the urine is often one of the earliest signs that the filters are under strain, and it can show up well before the estimated function number moves. Two people can have identical eGFR results, and if one of them has protein in the urine, their situation and their treatment may be quite different. It's not always ordered routinely, particularly if nobody's flagged a concern. So it's a reasonable thing to ask about. Here are the two questions I promised you. They take about 15 seconds. The first, do I need to limit potassium or not? That single question resolves the ambiguity that half this video has been navigating around. It tells you which version of every kidney food list applies to you, and the answer is in your chart already. The second, have I had my urine checked for protein, and what was my eGFR? If you're over 60, and it's been a while since anyone looked, those two questions are worth asking at your next visit. Particularly if you have high blood pressure or diabetes, which are the two most common paths to kidney trouble. And I'd add a third thing, not a question, but a task. At some point in the next few months, take everything you're taking, prescriptions, over-the-counter painkillers, supplements, that salt substitute, and have a pharmacist look at the whole list together. That single review catches more kidney-relevant problems than most people expect. So, let me pull this together into something simple enough to remember tomorrow morning, because that's the real test of any of this. 5 ideas. Whole beets juice nearly every time. The fiber is the point. The serving is the plan, not a suggestion. A low potassium fruit stops being low potassium if you eat 3 portions of it. Variety beats any single superfood. There isn't a best fruit here. There's a good habit. The pattern beats the clock. What you eat across a month matters. The hour on the kitchen clock mostly doesn't. And the one that governs everything else, find out whether the potassium rule actually applies to you. Because if it does, this list becomes a genuinely useful tool. And if it doesn't, you can stop worrying about a restriction you were never given and enjoy fruit the way it was meant to be enjoyed. Everything I've shared today is general education, not personal medical advice. Kidney nutrition, in particular, is one of the areas where individual guidance really does differ from general guidance. And if you're managing kidney disease, your dietitian's instructions for you outrank anything in a video, including this one. If you want one small step tonight, make it this. Pick one fruit from today that you already like, one you'd actually be pleased to eat, and put it somewhere visible. That's it. Habits that require enthusiasm rarely last. Habits that require a bowl on the counter tend to, I'd like to know which one you chose, and whether anything today surprised you. Tell me in the comments. I read them. And if there's one thing I hope stays with you after everything else fades, let it be this. Your kidneys don't respond to any single food. They respond to the pattern you keep over months and years. That pattern is built out of ordinary decisions made in an ordinary kitchen by someone who decided they were worth the effort. Take good care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.